Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES for 10% off any purchase over $10. If you use that promo code between now and January 28th, you will automatically be entered in a drawing to win a Ravnica Allegiance booster box. Check out the description below for details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 1 of our 5-part Ravnica Allegiance full set review. And this is going to be a limited set review of the set. Today we're going to focus on the Azorius cards, but we're going to look at each card individually and discuss how it's going to be best utilized in the sealed or draft formats. Now, aside from Azorius, we are going to look at some non-watermark cards today too. All of the white cards that don't have a watermark, as well as all the artifacts and lands that are not watermarked. Quickly before we get started though, just a fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to support us, one of which is our Patreon page. You're also going to find product links to Amazon down below. That's another way to help the channel. And finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers. Hopefully, you can save a little cash while you support us. But as always, thank you not only to the folks that use and look at those links, but to all of you. Y'all make the channel what it is, and I appreciate everybody. So with that being said, let's get into today's cards. Alright, go big or go home, I guess. We start off with a huge mythic, Angel of Grace. Okay, so yes, in sealed or draft, you're not going to see this card a whole lot. If you're the one opening the pack with it, though, you're going to be really happy. If it's your opponent, you're going to be really sad about that. This card is a powerhouse. I don't even need to read the thing. 5 casting costs, 5/4 flying flash. You got me right there. I'm happy. I'm playing it. Now, the other abilities are pretty cool because they can actually prevent you from dying at some point, maybe, or get your life total back up to 10 later in the game. You might argue that those abilities are slightly better in Orzhov just because they're playing more of a grindy game and they're trying to whittle down their opponent slowly, kind of the death by 1,000 cuts. And if they gain a little life, they can stay ahead of that grind. But let's face it, I don't care what I'm playing. If I can swing that casting cost to 2 white and 3, I'm trying to work this thing into my deck. Angelic Exaltation. I'm usually not a big fan of these enchantments that cost 4 or more and don't do anything when they enter the battlefield on their own. This one obviously is dependent on your board state when it comes to creatures. However, I think the payoff is pretty strong here, and I'm going to roll the dice on this one. As a matter of fact, I do think it's a relatively high pick uncommon in a draft. Now, you could argue that maybe this is best in Orzhov because you will have those flying tokens, hopefully with Afterlife. You'll have a wider board state typically. But I do think this is good in Azorius too for a different reason. There are some ways to gum up the ground with Azorius. You're going to see that today. And there's also flyers that are actually trying to push across the damage. So if you have some ground creatures that aren't doing a whole lot, maybe even just one flyer in the air, they can kind of transfer some of their power into the air, and that could turn out really good for you. So that's another way to look at it. Also, you could splash this into other decks as well. Maybe you're playing Gruul and you have some trample creatures and you want to be able to push more power and toughness onto a trample creature. That could get kind of interesting as well. There's also a defender theme that does play throughout the whole set, so you could maybe keep those defenders on the ground doing what they do, and then again, using maybe a flying creature or something like that to execute the damage. And this card could work in that type of game plan too. So this overall is one of my favorite enchantments of the set, honestly. Archway Angel. This one's a gate card, and first and foremost, I like that these gate cards exist because, and I've said this a lot, especially if you listen to the Guilds of Ravnica review we did a while back, you might be in a situation in a draft where you just keep getting cut off. You try to move into a guild, you get cut off. You start passing the other way, try to move into another guild, you get cut off. About halfway through pack 2, you realize you're in trouble and you got to do something extreme. Well, one option sometimes is to go 4 or 5 color good stuff, try to draft all the gates, and also these Gate Matters cards might get passed to you later than normal because other people might not be on that plan. And if you're not on a gate plan, well, these cards are a lot worse. So these obviously get better when you have gates. In this case, 6 casting costs for a 3/4 flyer. And that's not too exciting, right? I mean, when you're thinking 4, 5, 6, 7 casting costs, you're hoping for creatures with some better abilities. However, if you have a gate in play, you gain 2 life. If you have 2 gates in play, you gain 4 life, so on and so forth. So obviously, if you can gain a big chunk of life here, it's definitely worth your time with 6 mana. Now, let's say I'm not on this gate plan. Do I ever actually play this card? Sometimes. I don't want to play it. I'd rather have something stronger for 6 mana. However, if I need a flying creature, a 3/4 flyer, especially in Azorius colors, might just be good enough sometimes. Little control backup, it can do damage in the air. Yeah, it might get me there, but you're not always going to use it if you're not all in on a gate plan, I don't think. Also, though, remember, if you come up against a really aggressive build like Rakdos and you have anything in your sideboard that could help you gain life, make sure you don't forget about it and at least consider it. So sometimes this could be coming in Game 2 or Game 3 to help you out in that situation. Bring to Trial. Very solid removal spell for limited. It's a little slow at sorcery speed. It does exile, that's cool, and it is conditional. It only works with creature power 4 or greater. You don't want to necessarily go crazy with these. You want to balance your removal spells a little bit if you can. But one of these in a sealed or draft deck, you'll be happy with it. It's at common, you should be able to find them if you need them. Civic Stalwarts. Okay, this is just a fine limited card on par. Like, it's what I would expect from a common. 3/3 for 4, and it has an ability to boot. When this enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. This might be slightly better in an Orzhov build, where you're going wider, hopefully with those 1/1 tokens in the air. But again, I would play this in Azorius as well. It's going to push a little more damage across from my flyers that are in the air there too. And sometimes you just need a 4-drop curve filler that's going to give you some presence. This will do that. Might not always make your cut, but it's just fine. Concordia Pegasus. This is actually a reprint. It's nothing exciting. It kind of works into what Azorius wants to do though, and that's just put creatures in the air. Yeah, it might make your cut, it might not, but it gums up the game a little bit with that 3 toughness. And if you're not main decking it for some reason, remember, against those aggressive builds, you might want to bring it in because it does slow them down. Expose the Daylight. Okay, not a lot to say about this. It's a sideboard card. I'm not going to start this off in my main deck, but if I need it because my opponent has a problematic artifact or an enchantment that I see in Game 1, then I'm going to bring it in. Kind of nice that it's an instant in Scries, though. Forbidding Spirit. I like the board presence here. I think this is best in Azorius, but again, I could play this in other builds as well. A 3/3 for 3, it is 2 on color, but that's pretty nice board presence for white generally. And aside from that, your opponent's got a decision to make on their next turn. Do they attack you, or do they hold back and decide to play a card? It is going to tie up their resources a little bit, but it's still their decision, so it might slow them down, but they're obviously still going to make the best decision for them at that time. Obviously, this is going to get worse as the game goes on, too, and they have extra mana available. But still, I think it's just fine to run in the 3 spot. It's a lot better than a lot of the 3 drops you're going to find in this set. And there is a way to flicker. We will be looking at that in a few moments. I won't call that out with every card we see this week, but just remember, whenever you see an enters or leaves the battlefield effect for that matter, there is a card out there in white that actually could make that card better. Hazda Officer. This is okay, not very exciting for me as a common. Sometimes you need a curve filler, it's there if you do. 3/2 for 3 though, it's going to trade down a lot of the time. I don't like that. When it enters the battlefield, it gives one creature a +1/+1 buff till end of turn. It's not nothing, but it's not enough for me to want to play this either. If I have to, I will, but I'm going to try to avoid it. Hero of Precinct 1. It's a rare, you're not going to see it a lot, but you know what? You know what this is. It's a bear with upside. You know how I feel about it too. It's amazing. I love 2/2s for 2. If they have an extra ability stapled on them, even better. And this one has a pretty good ability. Now, I say this all the time, but when you play sealed or draft, the 2 spot in your curve is the most critical. The 3 spot's also extremely critical, but nothing more so than the 2 spot. 1-drop creatures are typically not all that powerful nowadays. They easily get outclassed by 2 drops. And you want to make sure you have enough plays early in the game, and those 2 drops and 3 drops will do that for you, to make sure you keep board presence and you don't fall behind early. This is nice because early on, it's great. It gives you board presence, you play it on turn 2 or turn 3, awesome. Later in the game, it could even give you more board presence in the form of these 1/1 white human creature tokens. Now to activate that, you need to cast a multicolor spell. I don't think that's too much to ask in this set. Granted, you might have a deck that doesn't have a lot of multicolor spells. It could happen. Probably not often, but it could. And if that's the case, well, maybe this isn't as good, but it's still good enough for sure. Now, if you have a lot of multicolor spells, then it gets even better, of course. Play this if you can. It will be great for you. It doesn't matter what build you're in. Impassioned Orator. Okay, we go from a rare bear with upside to a common bear with upside. It's like Christmas. This is awesome. You're going to see this one a lot more. It's still really good. Maybe not quite as good as the last one, but still really, really solid. A 2/2 for 2. I'll spare you those details again that we just talked about. But whenever you get a creature under your control, so it's not any creature, but if you get a creature, you gain a life. This is going to be especially good again in Orzhov because of the afterlife mechanic. You'll have more creatures just generally entering the battlefield on your side with the afterlife. But again, it's good no matter what. I'll play this in any white deck. Judiciary's Portal. Now here's that blink effect I was referring to. It's at common. It's an instant as well. Now you can't play it on an opponent's creature this time, only on yours, but that's okay. Also, when the creature comes back, it has first strike until end of turn, so if nothing else, it can be a combat trick for you. But most of the time, you want to do something better than just that, I think. Now, if you can blink one of these creatures with a good enters the battlefield effect, awesome. Or maybe you're just saving one of your own creatures if it's being targeted with a removal spell or something like that. For 2 mana, there's many times I might play 2 of these in my deck and be pleased with it, especially if I have a lot of good enters the battlefield effects. Lumbering Battlement. Okay, this one also kind of works well with creatures that have enters the battlefield effects in some ways. It is a rare, you're not going to see it all that often though, but it's interesting for limited. 4 or 5 for 5 Vigilance. Now you could just play it as a 4 or 5 for 5 Vigilance and it could be just fine for you. It's going to come up the ground. It's also capable of putting damage across sometimes. Not a bad casting cost. Aside from that though, it has another ability. When it does enter the battlefield, you can decide to exile any number of your non-token creatures. Now, tokens don't count, so especially for Orzhov players, you're not going to get any extras there. But your other creatures, your regular creatures, can be exiled. If you do that, for each one, this will get +2/+2. They'll stay exiled until this leaves. So you can get your creatures back if this dies or goes away, and they would trigger any enters the battlefield effects again. So that's kind of interesting, actually. Now, another thing I like about this card is it is a little bit of insurance against a board sweep, and that could happen potentially in this set. So if I'm concerned about that, I might kind of hide my creatures under this for a little bit and just try to fight with this if I can get away with that. But here's the downside. When you use a spell like this, you have to be really thoughtful, because if I'm going from a wide board state to a tall board state really quickly, my opponent might surprise me with a haste creature or flash creature, could throw off the combat math a little bit, and I could fall behind. So be careful. Don't overcommit with this. Also, this doesn't have trample. It doesn't have flying. It's got vigilance, which is nice, but that's not going to help you push damage across necessarily. It's a little more defensive. So if my opponent has a lot of chump blockers, maybe they have those afterlife tokens or something, this thing might not be able to get across, and it could just sit there while you get beat down in the air. That's not going to feel really good either. So you have to be real thoughtful about this card. And remember, at the end of the day, sometimes you can just play this as a 4 or 5 for 5 with vigilance, and it could be good for you. Crawling Caracal. This is actually decent. Like, it's a common. We see these all the time, the 3/1s for 2. I play them I would say maybe 70% of the time or so when I'm building my deck. Sometimes I just want some 2-drops to fill the curve. What's nice about the 3/1s is if my opponent does stumble, I could get a little extra damage across, maybe 3 or 6 points or so before they recover early on. Or sometimes this will just simply trade up for a creature that maybe costs 3 or 4. You know what? That's good enough. They don't always make my cut, sure, but if I need this card, it's there for me. It's at common. Rally to Battle. This is actually a pretty interesting combat trick here. It costs 4. It starts to feel a little heavy, but it's doing a lot. You can untap your creatures, so this could really surprise your opponent if they are attacking into all that open mana. And also, those creatures get +1/+3 until end of turn. So you can either use it defensively and hope somebody attacks into that mana, or you can use this offensively. Again, this is probably a little better in Orzhov where you have those flyers and you want to push across damage in the air towards the end of the game. But this could be very good just generally as a one-of in a lot of decks. Resolute Watchdog. Aw, this is kind of sad, but it's a good card. It's a great 1-drop. You don't see a lot of great 1-drops in today's Magic, but this is one of them. A 1/3 defender for 1. I mentioned earlier there are ways to tie defender into other cards. We're going to see a card a little bit later that does that. But even if I'm not worried about that strategy, this is good. I mean, it gums up the ground. Azorius will love that. Orzhov will even enjoy that. And then beyond that, it protects your best creature. Now, your opponent knows it's there. It's sitting on the battlefield. So they will realize they're going to have to play around this to some degree. But still, it's going to slow them down, if nothing else. Fantastic pickup at uncommon. I can see myself drafting this relatively early in a pack. Sky Tether, another uncommon that would be a relatively high draft pick for me. Now, this helps you keep the skies clear. It keeps the ground gummed up, though. I guess that's the downside, but it only costs you 1. However, Azorius is going to try to get by with flyers. Orzhov, we know, is going to try to get by with flyers, especially for Orzhov, where your flyers might be smaller. This could be very, very critical to have in your deck. So I do think any deck would be happy to at least run one of these. I mean, even if you're not thinking offensively, if there's a big trample creature on the ground or something, you could tie it up with this. So it's not a big resource commitment, and it's at uncommon, so they'll be around. Smothering Tithe. This is a rare, you won't see it a lot. It has a very Orzhov flavor to it, but Azorius would really appreciate this card maybe more than any color combination. Azorius loves slowing down the game, making your opponent make tough decisions, kind of choking off their resources a little bit, even if it is voluntary like this card does. So here's the thing. There's not always a great payoff for this card. Maybe you don't have anything to ramp into. Maybe you don't need a color fix. But your opponent doesn't know that. So they have to still make a pretty tough decision. Whenever they draw a card, do they pay 2 and kind of close off their resources? Or do they let you have this treasure token? Now, on the flip side, this card gets worse and worse as the game goes on, because your opponent's going to not care at some point. They're going to figure they got enough mana, they're going to be able to do whatever they can do. Me paying 2 mana to prevent more mana going their way isn't worth it anymore. So, because of that, it's an okay rare, and I would play it more often than not, honestly, especially within Orzhov or Azorius because of what those decks are trying to do. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a bomb that's going to win you the game or anything like that. But I do like the psychology behind this card quite a bit. And hey, if you do have something to ramp into, even better. Spirit of the Spires. Okay, this doesn't have an Azorius watermark, but this is a good example of what Azorius is trying to do. It's a very controlling color combination, as you would imagine, and they're trying to win with evasive creatures like this one in the air. 2/4 flyer for 4 is pretty good. Other flyers get +0/+1. But you know who else likes this, and that's why it doesn't have a watermark? Orzhov. You're going to have those 1/1 flying tokens. Buffing their toughness makes them more durable. Nothing wrong with that either. Either way, though, this is a very solid card. I would play this on its own many times in Draft or Sealed, even without the ability. 10th District Veteran. Good 3-drop here, actually. A 2/3 for 3 with Vigilance, and also when it attacks, you get to untap another target creature you control. So you could look at this one of 2 ways. I could attack in with this and something else, untap that other thing. It's kind of like they both have Vigilance. That's cool. But what I really want to do with this is hopefully have a creature with a good tap effect, maybe a Guild Mage or something like that. Tap it for the ability, then untap it, and then I can tap it again later. This card gets better in those circumstances, but it's a fine 3-drop curve filler regardless. Watchful Giant. You know, I want to be more excited about this card because it does give you a lot of power and toughness for 6 mana. I mean, ultimately you're getting 4/7 power toughness on the battlefield for 6, but it doesn't feel like it's doing enough. I mean, maybe I could flicker it or something, but even that feels like a waste of a flicker effect. So, I don't know. If I have to play it and I need to gum up the ground, and yes, white might need to do that, no matter what build they're in, actually. And if I need that type of thing, it's a common. It's there. You'll be able to get this really late in a draft pack if you really, really wanted it. But I think for the most part, I'm going to try to find better things when you're talking 5, 6, 7 casting cost cards. We'll look at a card later that does make this a little better, but still not that much better considering this doesn't have evasion. Okay, are you ready for some Azorius watermark cards? We'll begin with the white ones. Arrester's Zeal. Okay, this is a cool combat trick. Like one of these in a deck, if I don't have better stuff, is fine. It might not always make my cut. +2/+2 till end of turn for just 1. Could surprise my opponent definitely on the defensive. But it has addendum. If I use it more offensively, then it will give a creature flying. I might be able to jump over something. That's kind of nice. And especially if I'm playing with some larger creatures that can't get in the air. We saw that 4/5 Vigilance creature earlier, which actually could be bigger, for example. This would complement that very well. Sentinel's Mark. Okay. Enchantment Auras. The folks that watch this channel, you know I have this love-hate relationship with them. Mostly hate. However, I gotta give it to Wizards recently. They've been printing pretty good ones. This one's a pretty good one. Will I play it all the time? Probably not, but I think it's pretty solid. Here's the deal. It only costs 2. That's a big plus. It has flash. I can kind of use this as a combat trick, so that's kind of cool. And if I do, the creature will get +1, +2, and Vigilance going forward. That's cool. Now, if I use this more offensively and just use it on my turn, then the creature will have lifelink till end of turn. I feel like there's a lot packed in here. However, I'm going to give you the warning that I always give, at least one time in every single one of these set reviews. Use an enchantment aura, but be really, really careful. Best case scenario, use it when your opponent has no cards in their hand or when they're tapped out, so you don't get 2 for 1. You don't want to get 2 for 1. That's a bad scene. But this does give you a lot of possibilities and a lot of flexibility. I'll allow it this time. You can run one of these in your deck. It's cool. Summary Judgment. Pretty good removal here at common in white for sealed or draft. I mean, it's nothing amazing. The creature has to be tapped. It will do 3 damage to target tapped creature. It's an instant for 2. But if you play it on your turn, it does 5 instead. So it can take care of something a little bit bigger, but it's slower. Hey, you know what? In the limited formats, I'll be really happy to play this. Unbreakable Formation. Alright, this one's awesome. It's a rare, you're not going to see a ton of it again, but this does a lot. For just 3 mana instant speed, creatures you control gain indestructible till end of turn. That could really mess up your opponent if they attack in thinking they got the upper hand with combat math. Well, this changes everything. But the addendum is what I really like here. It makes the card more offensive. Now your creatures will be indestructible till end of turn, but they're all getting +1/+1 counters, so those will stick around, and they'll have vigilance till end of turn. So you could have a big push and not a lot of repercussion. That's always good, just for 3 mana too. Now, again, you might say to yourself, this feels like an Orzhov card, maybe in some ways more than an Azorius card. I want to pump those creatures and go wide, but I do think this is good for Azorius too. The addendum is really what's making this an Azorius card, I'm sure, but I do think I would be happy to play this in white decks. I would splash this in other decks as well. I just think it's really solid. Arrester's Admonition as we move into the blue watermarked Azorius cards. And this is a very good tempo card, as a matter of fact. Exactly what Azorius would like to do. It does let you return target creature, and that can be any creature, your own and opponent's, to the owner's hand at instant speed for 3. A little more expensive than you would typically see for that spell, but the addendum makes up for that. So basically, I could protect one of my creatures with this on the fly. I could bounce an opponent's creature and attack in on my turn, and if I do that, I get the addendum bonus of drawing a card, so this will replace itself? Yeah, this is pretty cool. Now, I don't necessarily need to fill my deck with these. They're common, they'll be around. But having one of these in my deck, maybe sometimes two if I don't have something better, could be a nice little tempo play. Code of Constraint. Okay, this feels very Azorius to me. It cantrips, I like that. For 3 mana instant speed, it's going to reduce the power on a creature, basically a combat trick typically. But Addendum makes you think about that because it gives you a nice bonus. If you use it on your turn, it will still give the power reduction, but it's going to tap the creature, and it won't untap during the next untap step. So it does free up the ground a little bit, or protect you a little bit if you need to be more defensive. So all these addendum cards actually give you some nice choices. I really like how they did that. I feel like if I have the choice in my hand, the card is going to work better for me. And they did a good job overall with that type of thing in this set, I believe. Now, aside from Azorius, I think this is a solid blue card. Simic would actually be really interested in this, because part of what Simic is doing is trying to kind of control the ground while they build their creatures up, get them larger, and then try to get in there for damage. So it kind of plays into that strategy too. Precognitive Perception, one of the best card draw spells you're going to find in the set. It's rare, you won't see a ton of it like many of the other cards we're talking about today, but if you get to play with it, play with it. It costs 2 blue, not very splashable, but that's okay. If you can swing that, go for it. 5 casting cost instant, draw 3 cards, that's always good, but that addendum makes me really want to play it on my turn. If I do it on my main phases, then I can scry 3, then draw 3. That's really awesome. Not only am I getting the cards, but I'm getting at least a little bit of selection out of it, moving what I don't need to the bottom of my library, keeping what I need on top. Yes, this is awesome. It does feel very Azorius, but again, I'd play this whenever I could afford to. Senate Courier. Okay, again, another very Azorius feeling card here, a 1/4 flyer, so it's another flying creature. Not very big, but it does slow everything down. It's got high toughness. Again, we will see a payoff in a few moments for high toughness, so keep that in mind, and it does fall in Azorius colors too. But even aside from that, yeah, I might just play this to have something in the air that can slow things down a little bit. This will be good against Rakdos. It will be good against Orzhov as well. 3 casting cost is reasonable for this, and you have the ability to at times give it vigilance. Yeah, real decent 3-drop here at common. Okay, let's move into the Azorius multicolor cards, and we're going to begin with Absorb. Absorb is an awesome counterspell. You gain 3 life. Sometimes it'll be more relevant than other times. Again, if you're up against Rakdos or something, it becomes very relevant. If not, you're still countering a spell for 3. It is very color demanding though, so you do want to make sure you can cast it pretty consistently in your deck, and if you can't, maybe you skip it. But if you're in Azorius colors, it'll be great for you. Just want to point out too, this one is a rare, and it's actually a reprint. Azorius Night Arbiter. Okay, we're talking about how Azorius actually gets their damage across. Flying is a big way that they're going to do that, of course. But a 2/5 vigilance creature that can't be blocked? You know what? That is not bad. It's very defensive, it's going to make things real gummy, it can still attack in for 2 a turn, and maybe you can even put an aura on it. We saw the one aura a few moments ago that I allowed you to use, and there you go. That alone might actually be able to slowly win you the game if your opponent can't find an answer for that. And even if they do, they just used a big answer on this card that actually doesn't feel all that impressive. And you might have just a big flyer come out later or something like that, right? So yeah, I think it's really solid. Another good common that you'll find within these colors. Also very splashable, no double colors here. And it's kind of an off-color way to turn on Spectacle, which is at least worth thinking about sometimes depending on how your pool is. Alright, here's another Azorius flyer. We're starting to get used to this. This is an uncommon, so these will be around. 6 casting cost, a little bit higher. 3/3, but flying in first strike. Creatures your opponents control also get debuffed, -1/-0. Hey, that's not bad at all. And again, I could splash this into other decks, like I think Orzhov would really enjoy this, so maybe if I'm playing kind of an Esper build, could be good there. And just regardless, I think anytime I can fit this in, it will be pretty solid. 6 is starting to get a little expensive. There might be times you could have better things, but I think in Azorius, this is going to be a real strong uncommon for you, no doubt. Deputy of Detention. Now this one is a rare, but it's premium removal on a stick here. 1/3 for 3 basically works like Detention Sphere. And yeah, you're not going to run into a lot of multiples of the same cards usually in Draft or Sealed. I mean, it could happen a little bit, maybe more so in Draft. But regardless, you don't care. You're just going to take the bomb out with this thing, hopefully, and keep it grounded behind this. And if that does its job, you might be able to pull off a win sometimes. Now, yeah, it's 3 toughness. It could die. They'll get their thing back. But if nothing else, it's a nice tempo play. Maybe every once in a while it's more than that. And remember, this hits non-land permanents an opponent controls, not just creatures, so it is a versatile answer. Dovin Grand Arbiter. Okay, you probably won't see this guy being a mythic, but if you do play with him, he's going to be pretty good for you. You might say he doesn't feel super powerful when it comes to Planeswalkers compared to many that we've seen. However, in Draft or Sealed, pretty much any Planeswalker is going to be really good. Here's what I like about him particularly. He only costs 3. 3 mana, you get 3 loyalty, can quickly go up to 4. That's something your opponent has to figure out. Because if they don't, you're going to get to 7 before they know it. And that 7 means you can do that extra big dig through time, which honestly, just doing that once could set you up to perhaps win a game. Finding your best cards in a 40 card deck like that when you're looking at so much of it, yeah, that is pretty amazing. So that's the whole idea of this card. You want to get to that ultimate as much as possible. And the +1, as long as you have some creatures, could get you there really fast. Especially if you have the knight we just saw a moment ago that can't be blocked. You have some flyers, for example. Now the problem is if you're behind, you're in a weird situation because you can't really go off with this card very much. And then you put him down and he probably will die soon. He can protect himself with the -1, but it's a little awkward. You can make the 1/1 flyer, and that's cool. You even gain a life, so that's good against aggressive builds. But I do think aggressive builds, if you're behind, will just eat him alive, because at that point he's going down to 2, right? So he's going to be pretty fragile. But if you're in a board stall, he could let you pull ahead. If you're already slightly ahead, he could slam the door on the game. I do think it's definitely worth running, and very splashable again. Dovin's Acuity. Alright, this is a take on Disinformation Campaign. It's almost as good. I would say Disinformation Campaign is a little better because of the discard effect that it has as well. However, this is still very good. Like if I play this for 3, I gain 2 life, again, very good against aggressive builds especially, and I draw a card, then when I cast an instant spell during my main phase, basically, hopefully I'm getting an addendum out of it, maybe I am, maybe I'm not, but if I have enough addendum cards, this could get a little bit better, then you get to return it to your hand, then you can play it again. So at first glance, you might think, well, that feels a little clunky, but every time you do that, you draw a card, basically, you just start to pull ahead slowly but surely. You also gain a little life, which is kind of nice, and then hopefully you have enough instants that you can do this a couple times even. If you could do this 2 times, I think it's definitely worth your trouble. 3 times, it's all gravy after that. Even 1 time, it's going to be fine. Like, it's going to replace itself, at least if nothing else, and you gain the life, right? It's an uncommon, so these will be floating around. Hopefully you can grab one for your deck. Emergency Powers. Okay, this is another mythic, so again, you won't see a ton of this, but if you can play with it, it's worth entertaining the thought. It does depend on the matchups, though, how good it is. Here's what you got to consider. Let me hit you with the downsides first. 7 casting costs, that's a little bit. And if you could ramp into it, maybe better. The other downside is you're replenishing your hand, you're also replenishing your opponent's hand. So there are matchups where that could be bad for you, like maybe an aggro matchup, right? Rakdos deck could just dump their hand right on the battlefield real quick, and then all of a sudden you're behind, right? So This card kind of feels like a panic button. I'm behind. I need to do something card to begin with. And if you're up against a matchup like that, I don't know if you'll catch up necessarily, right? If you're already ahead, this might be a dead draw, which doesn't always feel good, but it doesn't mean you don't play it, because you never know. You might need it, obviously. Here's the upside, though. It lets you react first to the new cards, as opposed to letting your opponent react first. Good time twister effects will do that. So I could use this at the end of my opponent's turn, and then that way I can strike first, basically, and start putting my stuff into play. Or I could use it on my turn for the addendum, and hopefully hit something. I mean, I should hit something that I can put directly from my hand into play most of the time. That kind of makes up for it if I do it on my turn as opposed to waiting to do it on my opponent's. Yeah, that could be very, very good, again, especially if you're behind sometimes. Lets you restock and hopefully refresh to the point where you get better stuff than your opponent gets. It is a little high variance, but if you strike first, you're going to get a little edge. If I'm not main decking this, there are situations where I might want to side it in. For example, I might run into a player using some blue mill cards. High Alert, here's the card I was referring to earlier. It's a 3 casting cost enchantment, and it has an interesting mana sink where you can untap creatures, so that's kind of cool, especially if a game goes long. Now, here's the real meat and potatoes of the card, though. Creatures you control will now assign damage based on toughness rather than power. So here's a payoff for some of these high defense creatures we've been seeing recently. So, kind of makes sense for white. You'll see some more, of course, in other colors as well. Because you could look at it one of two ways. This could be a strategy you employ with Azorius, or it could simply just be something you do if you drafted 4 or 5 colors even. There are defenders sprinkled throughout the set, and this does allow defenders to attack. So, there might be times where you're just strictly in Azorius and you play this and you're fine with it. There might be times where you're doing something a little more and you still play this. But regardless, it's going to be better in some decks than other decks because it just depends on how many defenders you have, what your toughness overall looks like in your curve. But that mana sink is also pretty cool too, especially in a board stall. And if you have maybe some flyers or something, but you're worried about blocking as well, and you're in a grindy matchup, this could help you pull ahead sometimes. Lavinia Azorius Renegade. Okay, this is more of a constructed card than a limited card. I don't see myself playing it all that often. It's still a 2/2 for 2, even if it is 2 different colors. Maybe sometimes I really need a curve filler, that's possible. But occasionally it might also work out as a sideboard card as well, because there are things that could be stopped by these abilities within the environment. We'll see them as the week goes on. You're not going to encounter it all that often, but in the rare occasion that you do and you happen to have this, well, wonderful. You could always side it in if nothing else. Law Mage's Binding. This is really nice removal in these colors, and very splashable, no double colors here, which is cool. Basically, it's like a pacifism effect, but it also does shut down activated abilities on the creature, so that's pretty good. For 3 mana, you're going to be happy to do this. Oh, and by the way, it also has flash, so you can kind of hold back your mana, play it when you need to play it, but definitely a relatively high pick common here in draft. Senate Guild Mage. Okay, one of my favorite Guild Mages, maybe not my favorite this time around, but a good one. 2/2 for 2. Okay, 2 different colors, but still good. Aside from that, though, these abilities are strong. The white tap ability is fine. I mean, gaining life is going to be better against certain matchups like aggro, like we've been saying today. But the blue tap, draw a card, then discard a card, looting's always going to be good. Looting is just going to make you move through your deck quicker. You're going to see more cards than your opponent. You're going to be really happy to have this. Sphinx of New Prov. This one's okay. When you look at this double color uncommon cycle they've created, this is maybe one of the least exciting ones, but it's not bad for Drafter Sealed. 4/3, it's a little more fragile, but it's flying. It has vigilance, exactly what Azorius wants to do for sure in this set. And also, they complement the fact that it's a little fragile with this clause that an opponent has to pay 2 more if they're targeting it with a spell. Okay, that might help a little sometimes. Maybe it won't a lot of the time. But as long as you can still cast that for 2 white and 2 blue, definitely a card I would consider playing. Like I said, if you're in Azorius, this complements the strategy extremely well, regardless. Sphinx's Insight. Okay, we saw that really good draw spell a little while ago. That was a rare. This one's a common. Still a decent draw spell if you need one. It gives you the option of doing this as an instant. That's always good. Draw 2 cards for 4. It will replace itself and go 1 deeper. That's good enough, I think, considering it has the addendum on here too. If you cast it on a main phase, then you also gain 2 life. And again, that's not always going to be super relevant. It depends on the matchup more often than not. But if you need a card draw spell, it's there for you. You'll be able to find this one. Senate Griffin. Another flyer, surprise, surprise, in these Azorius colors, but this time hybrid, so that frees up the requirement a little bit. 3/2 with flying for 4. Now that doesn't sound super impressive, but again, in these colors, you're very excited to have a 3/2 flyer. And also, it scries when it enters the battlefield, so I'm okay with this as a 4-drop. Again, sometimes you might just have better stuff, and if you do, that's okay, but this is at common, you'll be able to find it if you need it. Depose and Deploy. This is solid for limited. I'm a little surprised they didn't do more with Thopter tokens. I mean, we saw Dovin a second ago, and of course there's this card. You can use Deploy as a combat trick since it is an instant, and you might gain a fair amount of life depending on your board state. Not bad at all, actually, and if you didn't main deck this for some reason, bring it in against an aggro deck. As far as Dispose, also tapping down a creature, drawing a card, that cantrip's kind of nice, so that's also a pretty good ability. Overall, not a bad card for versatility and maybe to gain some life. Now here's the split card you want, the rare one if you can get it. Warrant and Warden. This thing is no messing around in limited especially. Sorcery speed, make a Sphinx 4/4 flying vigilance. That's kind of awesome. Again, we've been talking about how that's really what Azorius wants to do. Warrant is premium removal for blue/white with these hybrid colors, also gives you flexibility. Put target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library. So it's a nice little tempo play, definitely. And it deals with the problem, at least temporarily. Very, very solid card here overall. Our first Locket of the cycle is Azorius Locket, and I'll say what I said about these in Guilds of Ravnica. These are good. I don't usually use them, honestly, because I feel like with guild gates and stuff, I don't always need to do it. But if I need to, it's there for me. I'm usually not using this in an Azorius build, though. I'm using this to splash one of the other 2 colors, usually. These can ramp you a little, though, which is worth noting. Yes, eventually, if I don't need that color anymore, or maybe I get some other source of it, I can turn this in for a replacement card and another card for the 4 hybrid. That's a nice option to have. You'll use these some of the time, maybe not all the time. They're there, though, when you need them. Azorius Guildgate. Now, I use the Guildgates more than I use the Lockets, honestly, in Guilds of Ravnica. I don't see that changing in this set. And I do use these on color, too, sometimes to smooth my mana. It does slow you down a little bit, but I do appreciate having smoother mana. So I will run 1, maybe even 2 of these sometimes and be comfortable, even if I'm not splashing. However, I really like these when I'm splashing one of the other 2 colors. It's a nice way to bring another color in. Hallowed Fountain, of course, for Constructed, this is a great card. In Limited, it's still a great card, but it's not necessarily much better than a Guildgate. And I would use this under the same circumstances that I would use a Guildgate. I do appreciate the extra flexibility, though, of being able to pay 2 life to have this come into play on tap sometimes, though. Out of the 2 reprint lands we just looked at, Azorius Guildgate and Hallowed Fountain, I'd rather have a Hallowed Fountain, but it is rare. You're not going to find it that often. Okay, we're going to move on to some cards that do not have watermarks now for artifacts and lands. Since this is the first chapter, I figured we'd just knock these out. So this episode is going to be a little longer than the ones coming up in the future. But let's look at Gate Colossus first. It is a Gate Matters card, nice little Gate payoff here. 8/8 for 8 mana, so it's sizable. It doesn't necessarily have like trample or evasion per se, but creatures with power 2 or less can't block it. That's actually kind of nice. It can't be chumped by really small creatures, and it doesn't let you pile up a bunch of creatures as easily to take this out, so that's actually pretty good. Now, if it's in your graveyard and you play a Gate, it can go to the top of your library. That will tempo you a little bit, but if you need the card, that's a nice option to have. You don't have to do it, though. Now, here's the trick with this card. Yes, it's better if you're all in on Gates, of course. You might be able to get this out relatively quickly. If you're not all in on the Gate plan, then, you know what? If I have other ramp, or maybe I have just a few Gates, it's still worth running. 8 is expensive, but you're getting a lot of power and toughness, and I do like the ability that makes it at least a little bit evasive on there. I do think it's worth running in a number of builds. Don't overlook this just because you don't have a lot of Gates. Glass of the Guild Pact. This is very cheap, only 2 casting cost, it's a rare, has a pretty big effect too. Multicolored creatures you control get +1/+1, so only your creatures. This will be great with Orzhov, because remember, those Afterlife tokens are black and white, that's pretty sweet, right? This will be good, actually, anywhere where you have multicolored creatures, which is pretty much any build, probably, in Drafter Sealed, right? So unless there's some real anomaly going on and you don't have a lot of multicolored creatures, play this, you're going to be happy with it. For just 2 mana, it's going to do something, whether it's pumping a lot of flyers, like the Orzhov example, or just giving a Gruul trample creature +1/+1, you're going to find value here. Your opponent might actually just simply lose to this effect. Junk Troller, this one's a reprint, but it is a high toughness defender creature, so remember it does play well with the card we saw earlier. Also, it does let you disrupt graveyards a little bit. That's kind of interesting. Graveyard mechanics aren't as strong as they were in Guilds of Ravnica, but there are some things that let you go to the graveyard, so maybe you side it in certain circumstances. Or maybe if your opponent's trying to mill you, and blue does have some relatively heavy mill, we'll see that soon, then maybe I could try to slow down that mill by putting my cards back into the library. That's possible too. So there are some good sideboard reasons to play this, even if I'm not all in on some kind of defender plan. Scrabbling Claws, another reprint here. And this is more graveyard disruption, probably again better for standard than it would be for draft or sealed typically, but if I need it, pull it out of the sideboard for game 2 or game 3. Screaming Shields, now this actually will play well with those blue mill cards I was referring to. Also, it does boost toughness by 3, which maybe plays into that defender strategy a little bit too if you happen to go down that road. It's cheap at least, only 1 to cast, 3 to equip, that's not too bad. It's not going to be for every build though, the card's a little bit niche. If you need it, it's there for you. Should be a pretty easy card to pick up, even at uncommon if you want it. Sphinx of the Guild Pact. This is a real good uncommon right here. As a matter of fact, this won't get passed around for very long in a draft because it doesn't have any color requirement, of course, in the mana cost, so anyone can play this thing. 5/5 flying, counts as all colors, hexproof from monocolor. So it is 7, so you do have to work a little bit to get there. Again, 7 is not unreasonable for draft or sealed games, but if you can ramp a little bit, wonderful. And once you get this thing out, 5/5 flyer, pretty durable, pretty sturdy, definitely would be good in an Azorius build, but other builds would love this as well. And then once it's on the battlefield, monocolor spells can't target it, so can't be taken out by any monocolor removal. Now, there's plenty of multicolor removal in the set, so something will probably hit this still, but it makes it that much harder on your opponent. If they don't have an answer, they don't have a big creature in the air or something like that to protect themselves, they could be in trouble. Tome of the Guild Pact. Another rare here, and this one is an expensive mana rock, but it's still a mana rock. Sometimes you just need a mana rock. Even at 5, if this comes down on turn 5, 6, or 7, maybe you're trying to ramp into something big, maybe you're trying to fix color, you're getting a little greedy, it'll be okay for you there. But the real appeal of this card is whenever you cast a multicolored spell, draw a card. Like I was saying earlier, I don't think that's a big stretch in this particular set to cast a multicolor spell, so that definitely makes this worth playing for 5. Later in the game, even if you don't need the mana, the card draw could be incredible for you as the game draws on later and later. Gateway Plaza. Now this slows you down a lot, but it fixes color. You don't want to do this unless you need to. If you need to, it's there for you. Many times when you play Guilds of Ravnica, you kind of know, and I'm sure it's going to be the same in this one, you found yourself in 3 colors a lot, sometimes even splashing a 4th occasionally, or maybe even worse depending on how your draft goes or how your seal pool is. Cards like this will be appreciated at common. Hopefully you'll find one of these if you need it. You'll take the loss of tempo to make sure you can consistently play your stuff. Plaza of Harmony. Here's another Gate Matters card, this time at rare, and I'm not going to play this one unless I'm really deep into gates, honestly. I like the fact that if this comes into play and I have 2 or more gates, I do gain 3 life. Again, that's going to be sometimes irrelevant, but sometimes pretty good against maybe a Rakdos build or something. It doesn't slow you down. It doesn't come into play tapped. It can tap for colorless mana. But to get color out of it, you do have to have other gates in play, and it doesn't fix your color dramatically because it can only take things that you already have available to you from your gates. So it's kind of there if you need it. Again, if you're going like 4 or 5 color good stuff with a lot of gates and you happen to pick this thing up, wonderful. In a draft, this could get passed to you pretty late too, because there might not be a lot of people on that type of strategy. Alright, with that being said, that concludes part 1 of our 5-part set review. Now tomorrow, we're going to take a little break. This was a longer episode. We're going to do our regular Saturday Market Watch episode. Starting on Sunday, though, we will continue this series with Orzhov next. So until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.